first of all, I don't think that anything that has been said this morning is in a disagreement with the items that have been discussed around the table by the Medical Research Future Funds Advisory Board. We recognise all of the issues that you've raised. I will remind you that at the end of the day, the MRFF is not a grant awarding body. It is a body to advise the Minister about how money that the Minister has in her control should be spent to benefit health and medical research. But I also would advise you that it's really important when you're thinking about how that money should be used to remember that the process of spending it and the process of evaluating it will have to be defined largely by the people that are actually doing the work, and that the whole point of the thing will be that there will be key performance indicators to put in place to ensure that if you get money, that it carries on only if you're doing what you say you're doing. It's going to be rather different from discovery research, and I think that's very important to understand. And the second point that I would make, and it's been made before by others, is this is not a long-term solution to any particular problem. It is not a constant source of funding. It is rather a source of funding for research in particular areas and to facilitate research in particular areas, particularly where by putting money in now something will become more sustainable than it previously was.
Yeah. Louise, come on down and just get close to the mic so I can pick up.
Hello, Louise Bauer, University of Sydney. Thank you all very much. I have two questions. The first relates to issue to do with the capacity building, and I want to particularly raise the issue of diversity in the research workforce. And I realise I'm looking at a somewhat not hugely diverse group of people.
A man's panel.
Here, some don't live here.
I know. Hooray! But while gender is one really very obvious element of it, where I also just want to highlight ethnic and discipline diversity as well, which I think will be needed in order for us to address some of the wicked issues we're dealing with. And so I just want to raise the issue about what specific strategies could be used to look at, to actually stop the barriers to engagement of researchers. So that's the very first question. And the second question I have relates to population health. Much of our discussion, although not that of Michael Burke, has really related to what I would call bench to bedside and back rather than broader population upstream issues. And yet so many of the factors influencing ill health lie beyond the capacity of the health sector to deal with that. Physical inactivity, poor diet, alcohol, smoking, and so on. And I'm wondering whether we should think about specific strategies to especially address those big upstream issues, and can the Medical Research Future Fund deal with that, because it's such a broad issue. So those two areas.
Robin, do you want to address the issue of diversity first? As a token female?
Actually, that is an interesting response to that issue. Can I just say, every male here should be a male champion. Every white Anglo-Saxon person, myself, should be a champion for diversity.
Yes, no, we agree.
Yes, yes. So Steve is trying to wrestle the microphone off him, so I'm going to give it to him as a great champion for change. I do think just one comment on that, because you could talk about this for a long time, is really about the importance of people, organisations really signing up to the SAGE program and Athena Swan, because I think that is the first time we've really seen something start to address a systemic problem. It's not these single initiatives, it's got to be a coordinated effort, it has to be data informed, we have to act on that, institutions have to be held accountable for it, and eventually if we get to a point where funding is actually linked to your SAGE status, I think that will really send a very strong message that the recalcitrant sort of institutions will eventually see that there's a huge driver to actually address this seriously. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say about that, and then I'll give my very politically correct sidekick here to say something.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I was really going to say exactly the same. I think the SAGE process and the Athena Swan process that's happened in the UK is what I think is probably the best way for the institutions that we all represent to work. And I think it goes back to an evidence base. I mean, what we've found is until we actually measured exactly what we're doing and the degree of unconscious bias in our selection processes and all, I mean, it truly was mind-blowing that, there's not so much happening there that we thought we were good citizens, but we weren't. And you measure it, and then you adjust your behaviour, and then you measure again, and then you adjust your behaviour. I think that's the only way we're going to change this area, absolutely.
So, if the panel would population health? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, solving gender and diversity issues is an easy task in comparison with solving the problem of public behaviour, which is not good for your health. I'm not sure that the Medical Research Future Fund, or indeed any other source of money, is the simple solution to that problem. But we do recognise that a large part of what we have to do relates to altering the risk of disease. And I think that the Medical Research Future Fund will include funding for programmes which can be used to demonstrate strategies of research, through research, which are effective at doing that. Because you can see that in the long run, prevention will always be cheaper and more cost effective in terms of using research dollars as well, by the way, than just getting on and treating disease as it happens. So watch this space, as they say, but I think that we recognise that as a very significant issue. But it's not an easy one to solve. And the measures of success are not all that easy. Money works extremely well. The only effective measure for reducing smoking is increasing tobacco tax. It's demonstrated unequivocally in many countries. If you want to solve other behaviour problems, fines for seatbelts have worked extremely well. Maybe we're going to end up with a sugar tax, I don't know.
Okay, new rules of engagement. Only ask one question. Tell me your name and where you're from, and don't give commentaries, okay? Adrian Barnett, go.
Hi, Adrian Barnett, Queensland University of Technology. 2 years ago, The Lancet had a big series of papers on waste in research, which was based on a paper by Paul Glasgow and Ian Chalmers that estimated that 85 cents in every dollar that we currently invest in medical research is wasted, which is a shocking figure that other industries would not put up with. One big reason for that is 50% of studies, funded studies, just never appear. They go unpublished, and we've seen that figure here in Australia too. Now, funders can do things about that. For instance, the NIH is considering not funding people who have these missing trials. The Wellcome Trust has now started its own journal where if you've got a negative trial, you can publish that. The Health Technology Agency in the UK, you don't get the final payment until you've paid. They have a 98% publication rate. So I think funders have tremendous power to reduce some of this waste that we're seeing. But I haven't heard any talk today about tackling this issue or techniques that the MRFF can do to try and...
Thanks, Adrian. Who'd like to address that point?
Linking fund this microphone is going to stick here for more time than I would wish. Look, the Medical Research Future Fund will have evaluation processes built in during the process of funding, and key performance indicators will be critical, and money will stop if they're not met. The critical thing, obviously, is to come up with performance indicators which are both relevant and attainable, and remembering that this is trying to shift things over a period of time. That's always been the problem with medical research. You don't see the benefits for 20 years down the track. And that's not only because we're not good at implementing them, it's because it takes a long time to find out if they work. So yes, there will be that consideration. Particularly, governments are very keen to know where their money's being spent and whether it's being productively used. And you can bet your boots that there'll be some pretty clear contracts about that in the research funding.
So Ian, do you think that the final payment won't be made until the paper's been published? Will it be that strict? Okay. Frank Gannon.
Frank Gannon, QIMR Berkhofer Medical Research Institute. An early slide, Steve showed a point about KPIs not aligned. And you went on, Stephen, then to say about this, about the clinical deficit, clinical research deficit. And right through the morning, we've been hearing the whole range of activities the MRFF is going to improve, including commercialisation and public health and. So I think the question, if I go back to the start one, is what is the correct KPI for the researcher today? Because I think today's KPI for the researcher is survival. That's the only KPI they have, and I think the survival goes with an interpretation of the expectations of the potential funder, and there's a second guessing of what does the NHMRC expect of me, and therefore I will do that. So all of the other things won't change unless there's a clearance of everybody's mind about what the KPI of the researcher is. That goes right the way from how the expectations of the MRFF are announced and of the NHMRC.
I don't want all the questions to go to Ian. Rob, do you want to address that about survival of researchers?
Yeah, that's really important, I think, Frank. The concept that you address every potential criterion or criteria that you're expected to perform against as a researcher, and particularly for mid-career researchers where they feel they've done everything possible, they've published, they've participated, they've contributed in all sorts of ways and then they fail to get support is debilitating to the sector. We're losing not only their confidence but also their capacity. So certainty is absolutely essential in any commercial sector. You need to understand what the rules are. And I think you're right. We don't know what the KPIs are anymore. We've got to the point where when you get to 10 to 13% success rate in a project grant, it's inevitable that people doing everything that's possibly appropriate to expect success are failing. And you're completely right. Hopefully the commentary about shifting some of the responsibilities that NHMRC does partially at the moment into some of the domains of the Future Fund with KPIs and all the things that are connected to it, I think can address some of that pressure very rapidly. They are complementary. I don't think we're going to get certainty in employment for researchers in the Future Fund structure, and that's fine, as long as there's certainty in what government expects it to deliver, and the industries that we partner with have got certainty as well. Certainty is a great way to drive a strong economy.
Quick comment from Tony Cunning.
I don't completely agree, Frank. We've just seen announced by Gillian Skinner, our Health Minister, research translational grant schemes. We've seen grants put out now by our own AHRTC. So we're starting to see the partnering that's occurring with things like MRFF to actually change behaviour. And I think that's actually coming. And that actually changes the landscape in terms of people moving towards the sort of things we've been talking about today.
So would you be able to define a KPI for the researcher then?
Well, in the case of the Research Translational Grant Scheme, it's very definitely defined. Well, it is, because the individual is actually, for instance, taking just an example, taking genomics into investigating pathogen outbreaks. So it actually means that there's an application that hasn't necessarily been there in the past.
We're going to spread the love into this side for a minute, Christabel. Please tell us who you are. Sorry.
Yeah, John Caldor from the Kirby Institute, University of New South Wales. Thanks to all the presenters. It's going to be slightly disobedient and just comment that I'm a little bit concerned about Ian's response that the only way to change behaviours is through tax measures. I think there's been a lot of examples of public health interventions that have worked besides tax measures. And I think the question that was raised was really as much about bringing in broader other sector partnerships. And so we have the NHMRC partnership grants, for example, that have brought in other non-health players into those partnerships. And we've talked a lot about industry, pharmaceutical industry as the partners, but I think it's really important to think about both the public health arms of state governments, but also other sectors such as education. But so my question, that wasn't my question, that was my comment. I was
Keep
being
it short,
disobedient.
please. What is your question?
So my question was...
Is it directed to someone on the panel in particular?
Well, the question is about... So I'm hesitating to say Ian said, but I know you don't want all the questions to Ian, so I'm trying to avoid getting another question to Ian. So the point was raised about that this is unlike our current grants funding system, where there's not a great deal of evaluation and assessment about whether you've produced something which is effective. You're going to be checked as to what the researchers will have to be shown to be effective in some way to continue. We're not that terrific in this country in evaluating our health programs on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. This really implies a whole new kind of workforce or technical expertise to put on a common footing to actually evaluate these research initiatives and compare things that are apples and oranges and get some common metric. And that's actually quite a technical area. I was wondering if any thoughts about how that's going to work.
Ian or Steve?
I think that the question is basically needs an answer of yes. And we recognise... I mean, first of all, I'm well aware of the fact that there are interventions other than financial that you can use to change behaviour, but the ones that are most successful most generally tend to be financial ones. I think that the important thing for research, I don't accept the point, by the way, we don't evaluate research, it's just the current bottom-up driven research we do. It's just that we allow people to change the agenda during the course of the research to do what they think is the most effective research at the time. Whereas for where if you're looking for outcomes-driven research, you really set the outcomes as your key performance indicators, define those before you start, and focus the effort on reaching those key performance indicators. And as a government looking for improving healthcare, that's what the government is probably going to expect of us. But the key performance indicators will be defined by the people that are actually putting forward contestable proposals for how that money should be used. And those will be the determinants of whether that is seen by the Minister, presumably, as something that we want to be funded.
Tony and Steve, do you have something?
So what about commercialisation? I mean, there are some fairly definitive endpoints there, and maybe John wants to comment on that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, certainly in industry, of course, it's very normal to have put a lot of work into performance management and to give all the researchers very clear goals to achieve and what's an achievable goal and what's a stretch goal, and they're rewarded appropriately. And I think the whole world is like that now.
Steve first, and then Rob.
Yes. I mean, I agree, John. I think health evaluation is underdone. In South Australia, we've had some fairly dramatic health evaluation, but unfortunately what the health department's done prior to our AHRTC was move it all into EY or KPMG, and actually we argue that they don't hold the expertise. Actually, academia, universities and MRIs hold the expertise. So I do think it's an area that we need to grow, and we need to grow in collaboration, because there isn't a real need for optimal evaluation of healthcare. And as Steve Webb pointed out, you know, half of our clinical trials should be looking at things we could stop rather than things we could start, and that all goes to evaluation of healthcare outcomes. So I'd just like to see our health departments, and we're working hard on that, and I'm sure the rest of you are, see the university sector and the MRI sector as the place to go for health evaluation rather than the consultant sector, where there really isn't the expertise, I think, but a lot of very hefty costs.
As I said, that's what the 100 Group was doing.
Rob, pithy.
I think one of the challenges we have in the health sector is that we actually don't know how well or badly we're doing in lots of areas. So I think before we provide resources to an organisation to do research, they need to prove that they've measured what they've already done, so we can benchmark it about whether there's a change or not. Regarding KPIs, I think that most researchers who have any commercial engagement or any engagement with a whole range of agencies are used to meeting KPIs. There's a list that comes around every 6 months. You dread the email, but you look at the list and you say, how clever was I or not in setting reasonably achievable KPIs for that 6-month report? So I have at least 3 things on my books that have 6 monthly reports on how we've done. And if we don't meet them, we don't get them. The problem we have with the research environment for the MREA delivered research is that we've burdened the review process so onerously that at the moment we cannot evaluate what people have done in the last 3 years, and we use very soft approaches such as a Nature paper or something else to say that you've done well. Okay, we're wasting money because we're not measuring it well.
Robin, and then Christopher.
I just wanted to make a point about what we measure, and I think, you know, we've talked a lot, because we're researchers and clinicians, we talk a lot about the things that we value, and we don't tend to set the values that the society think are of value. I mean, clinical trials have only just more recently started to adopt, you know, patient-reported outcomes, quality of life outcomes. It's been a recent phenomenon. The pharmaceutical industry have not been driven by that. Their data systems to actually capture that with any accuracy and reproducibility is very poor still, and infantile. So, well, not infantile, but, you know, not sophisticated. Sorry, wrong word.
Immature.
Pharmaceutical industry, please don't quote me on that. But I think they're the things that we need to look at. So, in a sense, we've let the agenda be driven by health departments who measure 4-hour rules and the sorts of things that Steve were talking about. We haven't let the consumers define what they see as important in these different areas, and then the research should follow those lines of inquiry. So I think that's a fundamental missing piece often in a lot of these discussions.
Thank you. Christabel, thank you for waiting so patiently.
That was beautiful to hear, value-based health outcomes. But what I wanted to ask about, I think I heard you right, Ian, say that one of the major goals of the MRFF is to look at inequities in healthcare in this country, and not only devise research to how to address those, but also implement the research, you know, ways of doing that. And yet we also heard from Steve and from Tony and others that perhaps one of the best places to put our research funding will be into the large advanced healthcare centres or medical research institutes, which tend to be based in urban areas. And my question therefore is, how can we, if we're going to actually enact these things that we find, how are we going to educate the health workforce or the research health workforce in, say, less urban areas or others into actually doing these things when the expertise seems to be fairly much centred in large centres?
I think Steve could answer that as well as me, but the reality, of course, is that the next round of AHRTCs are going to be much more focused on rural and remote areas, on interaction across distance, and on making sure that the network is a broad one. And I think that that's really the critical thing for all of this, because at the end of the day, whatever research we do, if it's not translated into practice, it's not worth doing. And the mechanism for translating into practice means that we have to have a research literate and a research-sensitive workforce in all areas of healthcare. Yeah. And you can't be in it or out of it, you have to be part of it.
So, Dave, do you want to talk about rural and remote?
Yeah, so, I mean, it does vary across AHRTC, but certainly a number of them have primary healthcare partners and rural partners. We certainly have the PHNs as partners, and South Australia has 2 PHNs, an urban and a rural PHN, primary healthcare network. And a number of our priorities are based in the rural space and in the Aboriginal space. But I absolutely agree, and I can see John at the microphone, and he would comment as well. I think the academic health science centres in the UK started very tertiary based, but there's now been a demand for them to move into primary health care and into the rural areas of the UK, and I absolutely think the NHMRC call this time is motivated to do exactly what you've asked.
Tony, can you just hold on? We might get John to comment on this issue, and any other point you want to raise, then we'll come back to Tony.
Well, I certainly agree that the contemporary academic health science system needs to be looking at the health needs of the community as a whole. We're failing as academic health enterprises unless we reposition ourselves to deal with today's challenges. So absolutely with that, and the UK is doing that. A couple of comments, a couple of questions.
You can have more time as distinguished visitor. Actually, we need fresh eyes on this.
The first thing to say, it's these are nice problems to have as a result of a huge injection of funding and great opportunities. But 2 thoughts on the finances. Firstly, when we went through this exercise following David Cooks's report on health funding in about, I think, 2006, which ended in the creation of a large National Institute for Health Research fund, more at the applied end, 2 things came out of this. Firstly, there was an appreciation that the quanta of money that were applied at various points along the translational pipeline needed to be adjusted. I'm not sure that's the case here, but that clearly needs to be looked at, and I'm sure it is. But second, and perhaps even more importantly, and I think an important driver of success for us was the creation of something called the Office for the Strategic Coordination of Health Research. Because when you've got this increasing complexity in terms of your funding, unless there is an independent oversight on how the various funding streams knit together, tensions will arise. You'll get the duplication that's been referred to on several occasions. So I don't know whether you have that as a question, but if you don't, I think you need it. Could I make one other comment on the finance, which I don't think has come up? I've heard the concerns about sustainability in the biomedical space, and we all know that full cost recovery through grants doesn't happen. Now, you're going to inject a load more money into the system, and that's going to create pressures on institutes and universities as a result of that lack of full cost recovery. I think this is a question for Robin. You can either say, well, that's going to limit what we do, or the university takes the view, health is such a major social issue, we probably do cross-subsidise already for health research, it brings gains in terms of the university's reputation, particularly if the country is seeing biomedical research as a key development area. And increasingly, health research is going to need to expand beyond the confines of the conventional biomedical disciplines. So my question is, do the universities have a part to play in this sustainability agenda by re-looking at how they distribute their funds internally? And how do you manage the relationships with the other faculties? Unless they see they're engaged in the health agenda as well, you end up with the medical community alienated from the rest of the university.
Thanks, John. Robin.
Yeah, so I guess medical faculties are always very popular within universities, with the engineers and others. But I think the broader issue is really the social contract that universities have with society around education. And already there's a huge cross-subsidisation of students to research endeavour. And ultimately we'll reach a tipping point where we're really compromising the education and training of the next generation, because we're basically taking that money, and you know, whether it's 25 cents in the dollar or 30 or 40 cents in some universities to do research, we're causing detriments elsewhere in the system. And that's why I'm saying we don't live in an ecosystem that doesn't have checks and balances and levers being pushed all the time. And so as universities become increasingly short of funds and they start moving more into the international marketplace, and we start bringing in more and more international students to try and cross-subsidise the ever-increasing shortfall in research. But is that ultimately good for society, our society that we live in? Because a lot of those students end up back at home. Maybe it's good for a global world, but maybe it's not ideal for our own society. And I think that's the problem of trying to think of things in isolation. And ultimately, the education of the next generation is important, not just their higher education, but the education they have in primary school and in secondary school.
We're going to come back to your first question, John, about the strategic overview. But Tony, do you have something to say?
Just, I think in terms of full costs of research, I think this is beyond the university sector. We really need to move towards the US solution, and that is to have full costs of research funded along with the granting bodies. The institutes and also hospitals are crying out for support. The universities are short because of the failure of the SRE uplift, and we all know that teaching subsidises research. So research is underfunded in this country, and we won't be able to keep the institutes and their lovely cafeterias going if we can do that. If I can say one thing just about rural and remote, yes, and that is, do remember that preceding AHRTCs there are hubs, and the research hub strategy of New South Wales deals with Hunter, Illawarra and rural and remote quite distinctly through the policy of the Office of Health and Medical Research. This may differ from state to state, but there is very clear policy of being able to extend research into rural and remote. We're
going to go for rapid fire now. We've got three people here, one person there. But firstly, John's first question, I think, was related to high-level strategic overview, but injection of new money here, what's happening. And this actually came up in Rob's talk about the bridge between the MREA. And I think this is an unintended consequence. It is a first-world problem. We've got all this money, but we've actually now we have this kind of, we don't want to create interference with the MREAs. We just don't want to talk about it. So, but Rob, do you want to quickly, in like 30 seconds?
Very quickly. Just if you look at the trajectory of the funding, when we reach the peak of the Future Fund, and we look back on the scale, we'll basically be doubling what we currently have. But by the time we get there, it'll be pretty much the same economic value, which is fine. But remember, the mix of the funding is likely to be very different. What I'd like to see in the sector is we need to have someone do the research about what the nature of the workforce is and the implications of this change. Not to stop the change, but to understand it, so we don't model ourselves out of a situation where we're once again crying that we've got a workforce under crisis and we're not delivering on the money.
Okay, Marie Thiessen. I've got my clicky pen as my marker.
I'm frightened of you, John McGrath. Pre-teasing UNSW, and it was great to hear Michael and Ian talk about prevention, but I had a disconnect going on in my head because that's a long-term game, and then I'm hearing the MRFF short-term, and I have one of the translation grants that you were talking about, and I'm in a bind because I'm employing researchers in those grants, but the KPIs are going to be different, and I don't want to be encouraging them, you know, where's their future? So that disconnect I'm really worried about.
Okay, we're going to go to this question here.
Yes, my question's really from Michael Burke, but it's to do with responding to the perhaps facetious or provocative comment that there's no need for a pipeline that I think came from Steve Weber. And really the question is this conflict between evidence-based medicine and mechanism-based research or pathophysiology, I think you referred to it, that to me is completely unexpected, but has become more and more apparent. And are we at risk of putting too many resources into these often negative comparative effectiveness studies of comparing very similar medical treatments?
Does anyone want to answer that one? Michael?
Well, yeah, I have to say, we all are biased by the literature in our own disciplines. So the literature in my discipline in terms of the comparative effectiveness trials, I would summarize as saying largely unhelpful and has not really shone a lot of light. And again, in my discipline, the current therapies are really inadequate, and we are way behind what's happening in other disciplines like cancer and immunology. And so I think we desperately are crying out for new therapies based on innovative mechanisms. And how we get to those mechanisms is an altogether different discussion. But for me, I think this is one of the great challenges of our field.
I'm going to channel Actor and Steve, but I think that comparative effectiveness trial could be very cost-saving. The bigger comparison of craniotomy versus fluid management for closed brain injury. A New England Journal of Medicine paper saved Australia, I think it was $110 million a year or something like that. So even though you don't need a new pipeline, they're just comparing two existing treatments, they can be enormously important for saving a nation money. But I'm going to go straight to Sharon, who has been waiting patiently. So.
Thank you. Sharon Lewin from the Doherty Institute, University of Melbourne and Royal Melbourne Hospital. I wanted to perhaps have a bit of discussion about leverage, because to me MRFF is a great opportunity to leverage funds from other sources. Heard a bit about it from Steve with academic health translation research centres. You know, states will get the benefit if they invest, and the advantage of a federation is that there's a nice healthy competition amongst states, and I just wonder whether we can, and I know you will be advising the Minister of how to roll out these funds, but if they were leveraged, you know, matched by states in academic health translation centres, matched by industry in other areas, you know, it could really have a big impact and address some of these issues around sustainability, given the states will get the benefit of improved healthcare.
Yeah, it's no surprise that we have been talking with the state governments about leveraging funding in relation to some of the areas that we see as high priority for the Medical Research Future Fund. As you say, they will be the beneficiaries, and what we have to do is to make a case with them that in the long run, by doing what we propose to do, and I'm not telling you what that might be at the moment, that becomes self-sustaining, so that the states will take over the funding of what the MRFF contributes to initially. Because when they see that it is of benefit, then they'll see that it's also of cost benefit to them to carry it on. Yes, it is about leveraging, and leveraging. The Minister has full discretion about how the money is used. It can be given out contestable or non-contestable. It can be given out in partnership with industry, in partnership with state governments. It can be given out as a single grant, and it can even be given out for activities overseas, as long as there's some benefit to Australia. So there's really a very broad reach within the Minister's portfolio of what she does with the money. And leveraging, obviously, will be something that will appeal enormously to the Minister and obviously also to us.
Brendan, you have the last question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Last question and perhaps comment. Thanks, Ian.
No.
Thanks, everybody.
No.
Look, there was a lot of discussion today, which I really enjoyed about what the MRFF can offer, and perhaps a lot of discussion that was a bit similar to the lead-up consultations, Ian, that you led over the last 6 months or so. From my own point of view, I'm a little bit concerned about unrealistic expectations over the next month or so, when we might get 70 million or so in funding announced. And so I guess my plea is, but also a question to Ian about whether he agrees with this, but the government took quite some convincing, of course, to go down this path, and they feel that doubling the medical research funding and doing something into perpetuity, I know you say they're going to be short-term grants, but the actual funding in that beautiful graph you showed, modelling if it does reach its 20 billion, it's a doubling, and on it goes into the longer. They feel that this is an amazing thing, and yet, for reasons I think that were, to a degree, their own fault, they didn't get tremendous support, of course, for the first year after the announcement. So this is a crucial time when the announcement's made and we come to write our press releases and so on in a month's time. We need to have that bigger picture in mind, and I'm really quite concerned that there could be a deflation here. We're a long way from 20 billion at the moment. We're at about 4.5, as I understand it, and we want future governments who are watching this very closely to feel that the community's right behind these sorts of things. So you've given them priorities. They, by law, have to abide by those priorities. Of course, you don't know which ones they're going to choose. But nowhere near everything that's been talked about here today is going to be covered in the announcement of it in a few weeks' time.
Brendan, we'll take that as a comment.
I think, first of all, I don't think you will be disappointed, but we do recognise that what actually gets funded in the first year is not going to be reflective of what will happen in the longer term. And yes, the Minister is fully aware of the significance of that as well. And if you think that it's important for the fund that we get good publicity out of what we're going to recommend to the Minister is only too well aware that it's very good for the Minister that there is good publicity for what comes out of the money. And therefore that will be fairly high on her agenda too. Yep. And the strategies, 5-year strategies will cover a wide range of areas. They will be announced at the same time. The priorities will be for the first 2 years, and while some of the first-year ones might seem relatively less, how shall we say, impactful than you might wish to see, I think you'll see in the first 2-year ones that there'll be some really quite significant ones that will make a big impact. And whether the Minister then adopts them or not, obviously, is up to her, but we will be arguing the cause very strongly that we should be doing things which will be game-changing in the short and long term. And while the output, the outcomes, might be quite a long way down the track, the funding that you put in at the beginning will be seen to be likely to produce something useful. I think that we are very sensitive to that issue as a committee, and look, we all have to go and preach off the same hymn sheet here. This is game-changing stuff. And we really want to make sure that everybody understands that. We have to bring the community with us as well, and that is the big challenge in this. In the consultation process, we had to work really hard to get any feedback from the general public, if you like, about what we were intending to do. And we are very keen in the idea that we should continue to go out and engage with the general public to find out what they think about what we are proposing to do and what else we might be doing in the future. And I think that that would be seen as a very logical next step in the process of making sure that we get full impact out of the money.